Press point. Let's begin with logging in. And as soon as we log in, we're going to start with creating a project. And when we create a project, we can import OpenAPI or a Postman collection. But for now, we're going to start with just creating a new project from scratch. So let's start with something we'll call the pet store, which is a common one for the OpenAPI. So let's say we call this the pet store. And instead of importing anything, I'm going to go straight to creating the project. So let's go straight to paths. So at the start, we want to just start adding API paths. So I want an API path called pets, and I'm going to want to support the get, the put, and delete. And this is going to be a collection. If I wanted to do a single resource, I would select that one, and I would get different options. So I don't have any resources, and this is really my resource. And for now, we'll go with a tag, and we're going to give the name of Rover, and we'll give the name of a tag of a dog. So here's where you're defining a lot of other tools. You might have to do a different JSON for every action, but this is taking the collection concept, and you can define that and define the resource. And we'll call this a pet. So we're creating a path called pets. It's a collection. And here's our JSON for a pet. And we're going to give it a name of pet. And why we name our resource is kind of nice because if we add more URLs in the future, we can just select that resource. So you see here we have a pet, our pet's path. So right now, as soon as the path is created, seamlessly a database is created for you. So you don't have to worry about setting up any databases or configuring them in queries. It's already set up. So there's a data collection, which is for the most part a data table. So I have my API path, and you'll see there's my resources. You'll see my response is a pet, pointing to a pet, and you'll see there's my name tag. And let's go straight back to our paths, and let's right there show how we can instantly turn this into a real API deployed to the cloud with data. So I'm going to click deploy to the cloud, and I'm going to say first draft. And I'm going to deploy that. And you'll see this is now deployed on the web as a real app. It's not a mock with fake data or hard-coded data. This is a real deployed app. So if I want to check this out and interact with it, I'm going to use a tool here to use that, the Postman. So I'm going to paste in my path, and I'm going to grab an API key, which gives me full access. And I'm going to paste that, and I'm going to go send, and you'll see there is my Rover and dog. And if I want to try out, you'll notice GraphQL comes with this as well. If I want to try GraphQL, and you'll see there, I'm going to put in my API key. And then I'm going to look at the body, and you'll see there's my query, and I'm going to ask for the pet, and I'm going to put tag in there as well. So you'll see there's my name and Rover and tag. So you'll see this is a real API, and there's lots of other options you can do here, guidelines checks, design reviews. But since this is just a first iteration, let's go to our next iteration. And we're going to then start with showing you one of the biggest things about prototyping is the constant churn that has to happen. So a lot of it is database too. If I go and I change something, I have to go change the database schema, update all the data. So that's all handled for you. So let's go into the pet resource, and you'll see I have ID, name, and tag, but I think I want to add an address. So resources are associated to the paths. A data type is any of the helper objects. So let's create one here called address, and I'm going to add a field here that's called street, and I'm going to add one here called city, and let's say we call this postal code. And I'm going to add this type. So you see we have address, postal code. Now let's go over to our pet resource, and I'm going to add a field. And I'm going to call this address. And I'm going to update the resource. And then I'm going to go over to my path, and you'll see now the path now points to pet. There's my address, and I'm going to go check my database table, and you'll see now we have address in there. So all the data would be updated. And let's go right here to resources. Now I added that as a string, you'll notice. So that was a mistake of mine. I meant to select that my address is a data type of type address, not string. So this will show you even more of the power. So it was as a string. Now I'm changing the type to be an object. So now I'll update the resource, and now I'll go back to my database table, and you'll see now address is postal code, city, and street. So I'm going to add in a postal code. And let's say we put in E to C and 2 B E, and we'll say this is in London, and we'll say the street is A7A, and I'm going to update my data. So when I come back to my path, here we go. Now let's deploy our next iteration. This will show the ability now, and I'm going to put in my description here, added address to the pet resource. So now I'm going to deploy it. So this is again building a whole new backend that's ready to go. So we didn't change the URL. All we really need here is the new full access key. So let's go back to our Postman, and I'm going to come in on this, and I'm going to add in my new endpoint key, and now you'll see we have pets, and you'll see there's the address. And I can go back to my previous iteration, and that is still up there as well. So it's nice to have, whoops, I have to go back and grab my endpoint key. Let's see if I go to the endpoint key on my first one. And I'll put that in. And you'll see that's the previous one that didn't have the address. So let's go to our one that had the address, and you'll see there we go. So that's our second iteration, and you see these are all iterations that are always up. So you don't have to worry about if someone was using the previous one. You can just send them a new endpoint key, and they can start playing with it. So for our next iteration, let's say we wanted to get a little fancier on getting some logic involved. So what I'm going to do is I want, when I create a pet, I'm going to go over to the create. When a pet is created, I want to be able to say do not allow a pet to be entered without a name. So I'm going to come in here, and then we'll add some simple logic in here. And you'll notice a little reference here, and we're going to have some more helpers on here with your logic, but there's an overview of what is allowed. And so what this logic will say is anytime that there's a post created for a pet, check that the pet name is not empty. So I'm going to update that business logic, and let's do a little test. So pretend I passed in this information with an empty string. So it's going to go, please provide a pet name. There's my message. Now I also do not want to re-add a duplicate pet, because right now it would just add a duplicate pet, and that's not really what I want. So I'm going to add in a little bit of logic to check that. So just like a regular way to build apps, you now have access to the database. So collection is a special term meant for the collection that's involved with this path, because path is involved with pets. But calling this collection is really the same paths, get me the pets, and get the collection pets. So just added that in there for a comment to help. So now if I added in another pet that's, let's say, Rover, it should say that's a duplicate. So if I come in and I put my name in here and I call that Rover, and I say test, it's going to say that already exists. So this is an example of how to now start adding in some behavior. So let's go, and what we'll do is we're going to deploy the API cloud, and I'm going to put in our next, which is beta 3, and I'm going to say checks for empty pet and checks for duplicate pet name. So I'm going to deploy this. And again, this is a whole new backend that's created. I'm going to grab the endpoint key, and I'm going to come back over to now another screen, and I'm going to put in my new endpoint key. So now when I do a get, you'll see we should see the previous, but it has that. Now I'm going to say post, because I'm going to test my post. So when I come in, I'm going to give it a JSON payload, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to have an empty, because I want to check and make sure it'll say, hey, please provide a pet name. So now I'm going to provide a pet name, and let's say I'm going to say this is a cat, and I can do a post that adds in that, but I want it to test my Rover, which is a dog. Now this should give us the error that says pet name already exists, Rover. So it gave us our proper error handling. And whoops, let me get rid of this. That's and I'll just do a get, and you'll see there's our new Felix the cat. So you see right there, there's a little bit of a way to build the paths, add in the logic, and you can keep iterating and iterating and iterating. So there's much more here that can get more involved. You can start getting in and plugging into webhooks so that we get into other systems. And if I give you an example of a more previous demo, we have the paths for the portfolio manager, and you'll see here this is for adding in portfolios, stocks in a portfolio, and it adds in all the paths. And you'll see, for example, here if we look at the logic when we create a stock, you'll see that how this starts to flesh out all the behavior. You know, we want to check that it has a stock name, check that it has a ticker name. We want to check this stock doesn't already exist. And for here, we try to add a stock, the ticker that doesn't already exist. So you really have as much behavior as possible to make this about the most realistic prototype that you can get. So at the end of this, because you built this nice information system of your API, you can now come in and create custom docs. So I can come in and I can take a look at Swagger UI. I can run a guidelines check. You know, you're free to customize these guideline checks. There's a Postman. You can download the whole Postman collection so that you can import it to start running reviews. You can run a design review document. These are all custom documents that are created. And if we take a look at OpenAPI 3, that will generate all your OpenAPI. And I also made one here for Swagger. You'll see that references the OpenAPI v3. So if I want to do a test. So as we go through, you know, you can do this, and you can pump in the authorize and put in your, your API key if you want to interact with the Swagger with the API using the Swagger doc. There's Redocly. So you start to get a very powerful way of designing APIs. So some customers have said, you know, this is one place that we always start designing our APIs from, because we can get our developers or API designers to start here. It's easy to send out for review. We can conform to guidelines. We can conform to the documents. We can see this. We can try GraphQL as well. So there gets to be a lot of power. If we wanted to push this to a Slack alert, we would use webhooks. So it gets to be a very powerful way to design APIs. And if you think about the future, that there's so many different APIs being created in organizations, if they all were located in one area, easily accessible, generates the documents, and with the custom docs, it's really endless what you can create. From Postman collections, we could create, you know, we technically could create a way to test that, making sure that two specs are in sync and doesn't break any APIs. So really, it's endless the results that you could come up with here for the documents. So this is the end of the demo. Thanks very much, and please give it a try. And please DM us on our Twitter at RustPoint.io or send us an email anytime. Thank you.